Thank you very much, Joan. You will just go straight to it? Yes, I'll speak Catalan if no one minds, and I'll be speaking from here. I don't have PowerPoints, and I won't speak from down there because I'm not a professor. And I have to start by apologizing because I'm a bit hoarse today. I don't know whether I'll be able to make it to the end of my presentation, so please bear with me. Thank you. I have 2 points that I will address. One is the difficulties that producers have in implementing IPM. And secondly, I will be focusing on the olive fruit fly, which is our star topic today. In terms of how difficult it is to implement IPM, we producers have to talk about 2 different cases. There are producers who have integrated production, such as myself. We were used to dealing with advisors. We were used to keeping a pretty good logbook, farm logbook, and we were used to complying with our advisors' warnings and alerts and recommendations for treatment. So implementing IPM was not a big issue for us. However, for the majority involved in conventional farming, well, the majority are not used to this, but most of them have adapted pretty well. Or rather are adapting pretty well. They will eventually reach the level of those of us who were used to integrated production. New developments. They used to keep a logbook for preventional plant protection products, but now they have to record more information. They need to have a technical advisor. Some of them didn't have one. They need to have higher qualifications to apply treatments, or people with higher qualifications to apply treatment. And then there is the requirement for inspection of all PPP application machinery. But eventually everyone will have adjusted and everything will be much better. In terms of the olive fruit fly, I can tell you that I come from an area that is far enough from the sea. We're talking about 300 to 500 meters. I come from the Siurana area. It's close to Terra Alta, Las Garrigas, and Priorat counties. And it's a dry land area, and of course humidity fosters the presence of the fly. Well, the reason I'm telling you this is that years ago, in our area, we could say that if Montsià and Baix-Ebre could contain the pest, we wouldn't be hit. Even in nearby areas, the upper areas of the Terra Alta and Priorat counties, well, and Terra Alta pioneered organic olive farming because the olive fruit fly was not an issue there. But that has changed in recent years, and it has changed radically. Whether it's due to global warming, which probably has something to do with it, or a lot, well, maybe what I'm going to say now is going to overlap with what the preceding speakers have said, but this is what we producers are encountering. These areas that are high and that are far from the sea, that have significant differences between minimum and maximum daily temperatures, all of which works against the olive fruit fly, have experienced prolonged summers, particularly very warm months of October. And in fact, last year, it was even the month of November, with fairly warm temperatures, unseasonably warm, which means that the fly keeps reproducing, that there is less available to treat it with, that the olive is particularly receptive at that time of the year. And so all of this is leading to issues in areas that hadn't had serious issues before. So we have to talk about endemic presence of the olive fruit fly, not only in the Montsià and the coastal areas of Tarragona, where, unless the technical experts can contradict me, is probably the area in the world with the highest level of involvement, or maybe Huelva, okay. Sorry, we're hearing comments off the microphone. We can't hear what is being said without the microphone. Well, not a lot of olive trees in Huelva, but certainly in Cadiz. Well, what we can talk about in recent years is a general endemic presence. And, forget about alerts. I mean, we've had 2-3 very warm months of October, but basically, if we look over the past 15-20 years, we can see that the overall trend is on the rise, probably because of global warming. So this means that this pest is more of a problem all over Catalonia, not only in, Montsià and Camp de Tarragona. Camp de Tarragona had less of a problem 10, 15 years ago. Now it has more of an issue. But now Siurana, Garrigues, there are areas in Siurana and Las Garrigues and other counties which are far from the coast, which are fairly at a fairly high altitude, and they are still hit by this pest. As a producer, I think we need to tackle this pest on a joint basis, in a coordinated fashion. This is where our advisors and technical experts need to have a say, need to influence our behavior. So we're also dealing with the issue of some older farmers that usually do their own thing, who think they know everything, and that no one has any advice to give them. We're trying to work with these people too. We're trying to spread the word. Given the eventual disappearance of aerial spraying, which we all understand is going to be necessary because it's no longer defensible given environmental issues. We feel that we would need to focus on massive trapping or kill and attract and kill, making intervention extensive to all of Catalonia, not only the areas considered to be endemic. This is going to be important in order to tackle this pest. As a producer, I can say that we have an issue with the fact that there are fewer and fewer products that we can use. By the way, the safety plan for tomato is a bit of a problem. There's a 60-day buffer period, so we can't apply this treatment after August. And since our problems occur in October, we can rule it out altogether. I don't know whether pesticide producers could do something about reducing this time. We producers, of course, want to produce quality oil and olives. We want to harm the environment as little as possible because, of course, that also puts a lot of things at stake because we're selling high quality and because all of this will impact oil prices. This year we're talking about 2005 to 2006 prices, but we've had very low prices for quite a few years, which means that we have less available for inputs in terms of fertilizer and so on and so forth. The cost of all of these inputs have risen while our income has not. So if there were ways to preserve the environment as much as possible and to address all of these issues, we producers certainly don't want to be applying more treatments than necessary. So we have dimethoate, we have imidacloprid, which has a 10-day deadline. This is the one we use at the last minute, as it were. Producers will all tell you that trichlorphone, which also had 10 days, was more. They'll all tell you that it's more effective, but we can no longer use it. Imidacloprid is effective. It certainly is effective, but not as much as trichlorphone was a few years ago, and certainly not as effective as dimethoate. But of course, that's not up to us to decide. We will deal with whatever active substances are authorized and within the deadlines authorized. But we do want to let people know that we have very few tools, fewer and fewer tools that we can use. So massive trapping, generalized massive trapping, is something that we can see as a possibility. leading to fewer attacks, hopefully. As the representative of the Federation of Olive Growing Cooperatives of Catalonia, we talked about the need for an international study of the olive fruit fly. I mean, there's a budget for promotion in the international organization, but there's also a budget for research. It would be very good to have that. And so we need synergies here with other parts of Spain, the sort of Valencia and Aragon, which are also hit by this pest. I don't know whether I've left anything else, but anyway, this is basically what I think we can focus on for the discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Antoni.
Thanks very much, Antoni. We've got a few minutes now for debate. If anybody would like to take the floor from the audience, would you like to address any of the speakers? If so, you'll need a microphone.
Les pediría que se identificase.
I'd ask you to, first of all, say who you are and to keep it brief so we can give the chance for the maximum number of people to take part. Andreu Taverner from Sanidad, from Plant Health. I'd like to ask a question to Dr. Brewer. Are there any studies where consultations about using the plant coverage, plant cover, and how that relates to the development of the fly itself?
La relazione tra?
Entre el manejo del suelo, la cubierta vegetal y el ciclo de la.
Well, that is a very important question. This is something that's been examined in the last few months, in fact, very recently, following this abnormal infestation, this enormous infestation we had in 2014. And the plant health authorities are wondering if proper soil management could have an influence on the mortality of the pupae. But when as far as weed clearing or weeds underneath olive trees are concerned, that's a fact. They'll always be with us, and therefore it would be absurd to imagine they actually plough or till the land under these olive trees to actually kill off more of the pupae under the soil when we don't have the results concerning the effect of soil management vis-a-vis mortality. On the ground, they play a very important role because caribids, beetles, are very, very important. They play a very important role in soil ecosystems. Another important question is, what sense does it make to till the ground to have an influence on the mortality of pupas when the flies come out at the end of April and May and they fly all over the place and they can then spread into other areas. They can fly for many miles. So we don't really have the conditions to be able to imagine a sort of soil management which would help to control the fly. However, what we do need, as I have tried to say at the end, is to make the most of the plant biodiversity, which can help to contrast, well, it really goes against what was said by the colleague to my left. At least that's my thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
¿Ninguna otra cuestión?
Any other questions? Any other issues?
Joan Porta de
Joan Porta from the Terres de l'Ebre. My question is to Ricardo. What kind of joint action are you carrying out in Andalusia to combat the olive fly, and as organized by the regional government of Andalusia? What are you doing? Well, right now, the joint efforts in Andalusia against the olive fly, that's a real challenge facing farmers, olive producers, and we want to help them out. But as things stand, we don't actually do more than just providing technical advice, providing them with sufficient information and know-how so they can take the best decisions. But for the time being, organization is 100% up to them. There are areas where they're properly organized and they are handling the pest in what we consider to be an acceptable way, with proper handling of large areas, coordinated action in areas with higher population densities, where they could they could move to other areas which would be less favorable for the fly to take hold. There's another area where, unfortunately, olive producers are still facing this organizational challenge of pooling their resources, human and material resources and decision making, and that is something that's a lot harder to overcome.
Bon dia, soc un pagès de la...
Good morning. I'm a farmer from the Terra Alta. I'm in charge of an organization. My question is to the gentleman from Murcia. These flies from December to January, how many flies were you catching? Did you catch any in that period? Another question, do you know the cost of these fly traps? Thank you. The individual cost of fly traps, I don't know. There are many different kinds. The collective cost depends on the amount per hectare. I think 40 per hectare, depending on the type of fly traps. Something between 60 and 110 euros per hectare. And December, no, we're not going to go out and count flies. We basically are writing up reports in December. The 6th of November, I think it was. I think we counted 1,430 flies in one trap, 700 in another, 400 in another. That's just in the same week. I think as however many you've got, I'm sure you don't beat us. And that's in the space of 1 week, the 6th of November. The week before we had about 200. So we caught more flies in 1 week in November than in 5 weeks before, where we only caught about 3,000–4,000 flies in 15 or 16 traps of different types. We've been 3 times in January and February. We've caught the odd fly in traps, but it's been very cold.
No, para Bruno.
One for Bruno. We've talked about mass trapping and trap and kill. What experience have you had with Bavarium and other kinds of fungi in Italy? Well, the experience we've had in Italy only concern Bavaria bassiana. It's a fungus which is associated, the other one is associated more to beetles than to flies. So, in this specific case, the activity of the fungus vis-à-vis the fly is not really very clear at all at the moment. We've been looking at different plots or parcels treated with a commercial product in Italy, which calls naturalis. That's where the fungus is the active principle. So they've been repeatedly treated with naturalis, and others that are untreated or treated with other products. We've seen there's a statistical difference in terms of the reduction of the attack vis-à-vis other treatments. But we don't know exactly why. The idea, the theory is that the fungus inhibits the development of the microbial flora of the phyloplane, and therefore means that the olive is no longer attractive to the adults. For other insects, we've seen that the fungus can go through the cuticle into the insect and to actually kill it. In the specific case of Ragoletis and other tephridites, we've seen with this fly that the product is labeled, and the label says that it's a product which is used as a deterrent, so it defends the plant by reducing or completely doing away with the attraction that the plant has for the adult. So we've certainly had positive results, but the problem is that it's a contact product. Therefore, like any contact product, it is washed away and diluted by rain. So in flood years like 2014, it's not a product that's really fit for purpose. The validity of a fly treatment can only be seen when things get difficult. You know, it's everything's easy when you're going downhill, as we say where I come from. It's when you have to go uphill that you really see whether you found a solution or not.
Hola, dos preguntas, una para el señor Bruno.
Two questions, one for Bruno and one for Matteo and Mr. Duatis. So the first question, Bruno, you mentioned that one of the possible measures that could be used to fight against olive fly would be to strengthen biodiversity measures. So I'm asking, what measures could we establish in terms of biodiversity if we take into account that most olives are growing in arid areas, very little rainfall, very well-established crops that it's difficult to change? What can we do? Can we change? One thing is changing the plant cover, but if there isn't much plant cover, and then to Matteo and the Watis, my question, thinking about climate change. We're seeing that more and more, and of course it's going to get worse. It's going to affect the olive fly. So is mass trapping, do you think, is that the answer? Bruno. Okay. Well, without a doubt, we do need to take a certain distance from the sort of generic discourse. We can say, okay, biodiversity is beautiful, it's great. We've got to see exactly what we mean by that. for a long time now, in entomology, we talk about functional biodiversity. That's a concept that's come on board, or as a sort of come to be used in the richer cultures like viticulture to respond to demands and requirements for natural controls of grasshoppers, for example. So this is a situation today, or over the last few decades, we have seen things change. Certainly in Spain, like with the Arbequina, we've got 1,000 plants or trees per hectare. It's become a lot more intensive. So it's a very relevant question. What biodiversity can we actually practice? The answer is I don't know. But that's a problem, because what I can say is that where we are lacking biodiversity is the difference between the phytophagous organism and the plant itself. The desertification and the use of herbicides. Soil management with herbicides can, of course, deal with weeds, but it can be counterproductive because of the presentation, because it can do away with useful or helpful flora. So we've got to be clear about what we're talking about. In the last few months, once again, following that unusual infestation in 2014, a lot of people have been talking about how important it is in Inola viscosa, in this area. Inola viscosa, this is tephrodite, myopidis, in fact, which is attacked by Neopelmus. That's a parasite. It's one of the ectoparasites of the olive fly. And you can see in the, 2 + 2 is 4. So we can cover them with the Inola viscosa. But that's a very simplistic view. Having Inola viscosa is one thing, but there's other which is a host, Neopelmus. That's not to say that's going to be the sort of magic bullet that's going to solve everything, because very often it comes on as it parasites the primary parasite. We're talking about Eupelmus. It's a secondary parasite, so we mustn't simplify things too much. Over the last few weeks and months, I've been thinking about this because in Tuscany and other regions of Italy, the farmers have been given this kind of message, saying, let's try to foster the presence of Inola viscosa. So one thing is biodiversity, a sort of management of balance. That's one thing. And the other is to try and force a sort of a relationship between olives, which is a host plant, which is part of the agro-system, and the fly and its parasites. So I know I haven't really answered your question there, but I do hope at least that I have showed you how complex this issue is. In my opinion, we need to move towards solutions through an integrated approach to find an integrated solution. Kaolin, for example, clay not just the only way you're going to control, are not only used to control the fly, they're also used to protect against the heat. Early harvest is not only used to deal with the flies, but it's part of sanitation. It's a measure, a preventive measure against future attacks. So, harvest at the start of the veraison can affect the quality of the polyphenols in the olive oil. And researchers have looked into this, and they've showed that at early harvest, what exactly do we mean by early harvest? But certainly earlier than usual practices does help to separate the flowers from the buds. So I'm in favor of that kind of approach, ones that not only looking in one direction, not only looking at the fly. As far as mass trapping is concerned, from the start of the last century, we've been using these. We had some little sort of huts, and we'd put some honeydew in them and sodium arsenic, and that was used in larger areas. And our colleagues in the 1940s used this, and we saw that they reduced the population. It would drop very sharply. We worked with these average areas, which we're talking about 2 hectares. You can control the population, but then you reach a point in September, October time when the fly then starts to attack. It doesn't seem to care whether it goes to feed on one another, and the attack levels are pretty much the same as when you've had mass catches. So mass catches, yes, good idea. Colleagues are working on that. A lot has been done, but it seems now that we need to work on very large areas. In organic agriculture in smaller areas, mass catcher is a much more complicated issue, and the test that we've done would indicate that we need to move towards kaolin-based products, especially in endemic areas. And what Bruno was saying just now, it's not just kaolin, but it's a sort of overarching, integrated view of it. The problem is that we're ignorant. We don't know how the agrobiosystem works because there are so many factors at play. We're talking about biology, we're talking about the pests, we're talking about the year, the weather, the weeds, and so on and so forth. There are so many different elements. But I think that mass trapping is a good idea, but only if we're doing it over a very large area. Well, I tried to say this before. There are 2 kinds. So there's adulticide and larvicide. Obviously, when you're doing mass trapping, you're going for the adults. But there's a point where you also have to start approaching the larvae, the system. You can't just control all of the adults. Adults are always going to get there and always going to lay their eggs. I would say 4 hectares is the maximum level for a mass trapping, and minimum about 4 hectares. I don't know. You've got to see the total amount of attack. You've got to have some kind of an indicator, and the indicator, it'll tell you, if it's 50% attack or 15% to avoid having to do mass catches. If you're looking at 4 or 5 hectares, it's got to be as large as possible, the data that, or the figures we've achieved, the treatment can manage to cut these by 15–20%. Allow me just to say one thing, and then we'll close. Yes, as far as zona viscosa is concerned, I think that could take the place of coniza. I don't know what the common name is, but if it's an emerging weed, certainly in Andalusia, it could be used, which is on the outskirts of the parcels, but using zona viscosa within the parcel is quite easy. You can use glyphosate to just remove all the competition, and that way we could have something that would be even harder to deal with than coniza. So, yeah, that's just my thought. Thank you to the speakers, and see you later.
Tú sabes que el